Good morning everybody and welcome to the 4th annual BCG Sheep Management Showcase. My name's Justine Severin, I'm a PR officer at BCG and I'll be your MC today. As you know, sheep are becoming an increasingly important part of Wimmera and Mallee farming systems, which you'll hear more about today. But importantly, the importance of livestock to growers in our regions has been recognised by BCG, and it's the reason we continue to host this event for you. I'd like to thank MLA, GRDC through the Grain and Graze Initiative, Best Wool, Best Lamb, the VFF and AWI and MLA who have supported us through the Making More from Sheep initiative for contributing towards this event. As interest from our growers would indicate, the Sheep Management Showcase is highly valued by our region's farmers. So we will be encouraging our RDCs and industry to continue to support this event. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Tim Leeming. Tim and his wife, Georgie, run a self-replacing prime lamb flock and a seed stock business. They have cattle and they grow cereal pastures at Pigeon Ponds in Western Victoria. They have substantially expanded their business over the past decade and have a strong focus on productivity and land development. Tim is also involved in sheep extension. He runs sheep groups and sits on livestock and CMA committees. One of the roles that Tim's known for is he's the chair of SAMRAK, so MLA's SAMRAK committee in the Western region of Victoria, which he'll talk to you about. So thank you, Tim.
Thanks very much, Justine, and thanks very much for BCG inviting me up here today. It's a real privilege to be amongst all of you, and you know what a great initiative this has been as a great value add for businesses in the northwest, and a real strong emphasis on livestock is great, and hopefully. I can share some information with you this morning. I've got a few roles today. I don't think there was many people that could attend from MLA, so I've been given a job, a multitasking job. So I'm going to give you a little bit on economics and even maybe a slide on weather, and so I'm going to be all things hopefully. So I'd just like to start to introduce the role of SAMRAK. Basically, this was formed, it's actually its second version, but last year, about this time last year, was put together. We had our first meeting in November of 2015. And basically, this is a conduit for you to express your priorities, I guess, and issues within the red meat industry, and engage with regional specific committees that can actually be your voice to MLA. So to give you a bit of an idea of how it's put together, so I'm chair of the Western Victorian region, which runs from the coast to Mildura. So there's a little bit of diversity there, and it's a big area, and there's a lot of red meat within it. So basically there's three councils, one in West Australia. The West Australians are the Wild West. They sort of like to run their own race, so we couldn't second them over here. So they're by themselves, and obviously the northern beef operators have got their own council, which is mostly in the northern half of Australia, and then there's 7 regions within SAMRAK. So this gives you a bit of a map on where those committees sit. So as you can see, the Western Victorian regions circled there, which you are a part of that. This gives you a bit of an idea of we've got the smallest committee within those 7 regions. The reason why we've got a small committee is that we want to actually get some representation from producers in the northwest of the state. So as you can see there's quite a number of people that are in the southern half of the state, and days like today is going to be really good for me to engage with some proactive producers from this part of the world. We had to put together some priorities very quickly last spring, and the main priority that we came up with as a committee that was put together last year was actually adoption. And there's so much good information out there in agriculture, but there's very little uptake in many aspects. So trying to engage with the people that are not taking up some of this research and development is probably a main emphasis that we've highlighted. Feed base obviously is a really popular priority in all regions across Australia in red meat. We can always grow more feed and utilise more feed, but the one thing that I'd like to mention within the feed base area is the actual integration of livestock and cropping. So that has been a consistent priority right across all the regions within SAMRAK. And I'll talk a little bit about that today. Water resources will obviously, if we're going from a sow's ear to a silk purse in 2 seasons, and the last couple of years, as didn't matter if you were at Simpson in the deep southwest as a dairy farmer or you're up here, water was a real issue this time last year. So water was right as a hot topic when we first met last year. There was certain regions that actually haven't incurred 2 failed springs in the high rainfall zone, and obviously there was huge challenges up in the northern areas as well. So what we did was put some leniency, I suppose, and got in government's ear to actually try and get some blue sky thinking about water and our resources. So things like in the areas such as Wedderburn, extending pipelines and also looking at feasibilities of extending some of that water infrastructure, and some of that water infrastructure actually has to go south, believe it or not, because there was a lot of empty dams in southwest Victoria last year, and no infrastructure to get water to those places. So biosecurity and traceability, it's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, and it's obviously really high on MLA's strategic plan. So biosecurity, traceability, food safety, it all intertwines. It's really, really important. Obviously, we've got some added benefits in actually getting paid for what we produce. If we can get some individual carcass feedback in the supply chain and actually get paid for it, that'll be great. Some of the things that you're familiar with, and there'll be people here today, Catherine James over there, that'll has got some information on biosecurity and traceability through the VFF. But also, things like EID, what are the benefits on farm of using electronic identification of sheep? I think you will find that it'll become compulsory very shortly. And if you're exposed to what a biosecurity outbreak would do to the sheep industry in Australia, it'd scare the pants off you. Cattle are a lot better placed than sheep at the moment, and really we've got to look seriously about how we can improve our traceability if we do get some sort of biosecurity outbreak. Now, I've finished all that boring stuff about SAMRAK. We'll go on to markets now. So I'm going to put my marketing hat on. Cattle prices, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know. They're at record highs. MLA sent me some slides yesterday. I've just plucked out the good ones. So the ones that are going to put a smile on our face. But it is very positive. I didn't actually have to take out too many. I'm not as good looking as Joan Bunn, but this is the outlook looks damn good. I think I looked on the BOM website this morning, and looks like there's 1 to 2 inches for most of the state towards the weekend and early next week. So things are pretty positive in that regard, and it certainly looks fantastic. It even looks good around Bendigo. I went to Albury Lambex last week, and it looks fantastic all over the state at the moment. Where's the cattle herd at? We're at, there was booms obviously in the 70s, and, we're really sort of starting to, bottom out on our cow numbers, and they're starting to. It looks as though that we've really sort of got to the bottom of those, and there's a real herd rebuilding program going to start from here on, as you would expect with the prices. Trade lambs looks really positive this year. It's nothing like having a bit of green grass and not being forced to sell your lambs when the season dictates it. So that's obviously going to be a real positive. Our main competitor in lamb exports is New Zealand, and as you're all aware, there's been a real big push into dairy in that area, and their flock is at its lowest ebb. So if our main competitors at a low ebb, and yeah, it's going to also help with our prices and also our export markets. Our lamb exports have slowly been increasing over time, and we've obviously changed the dynamics of our sheep flock to supply that need. But at the moment, we've been satisfying those exports really well, and it's been progressing into a lot of other markets. The US, a number of you might have been at LambX last week, but the signs look pretty positive. The exports markets had pretty much increases right across the board, only marginal increases in China last year. So lamb's a great story. Seems to be gaining a fair bit of momentum, and things look good for this spring and in the short term. Goats, I don't know much about goats, so I was given this slide. I thought I'd better give them justice. And yeah, look, it's one of the most important meats in the world, and consumed meats in the world. And from an Australian goat meat exports, you can see that it's progressing really, really well. So just a little bit about our flock. So where does our flock sit at the moment? And I suppose, we've had this increasing demand, and really what our sheep flock is at historic lows from a general numbers point of view, but it's the flock that's actually changed quite a bit. So the marking rate, when you have El Nino years like the last couple, it's actually very good for lambing. So I'm a little bit, I suppose, I'm a little bit concerned that they might be counting their chickens before they hatch a bit with the 94% assumed marking rate, because if you live where I live, in the last 3 months we've had probably one of the wettest winters in 30 years, and it's been pretty horrific on some of our lamb survival. So it's been quite challenging. So 1% shift in our marking rate would take away 1 million sheep just like that. So I don't think we may not be making the progress in our sheep numbers if what was occurred in the last 3 or 4 months down the high rainfall zones with our marking rates and survival. Lamb slaughter, it was record levels. And that's, obviously the continuation of that lamb slaughter is going to be really dependent on our ewe flock, obviously. So how much traction we're going to make on our ewe flock there's a huge lag time in this. A lot of these figures, those surveys that you do, there was one recently that we all had to do, they're really important for us to give through Australian Bureau of Statistics and MLA and AWI, that we actually give them as much information as possible so they can make accurate forecasts. But there is a lag time. So often what we see now is a result of 1 to 2 years ago. So how it's going to look in the future is anyone's guess. Marking rates, we've had that change in the dynamics of the sheep flock. The ewe has changed, and I'll go on to a slide in a sec that'll show that. But we're making some progress. Lifetime ewe groups that have been running around, and I know there's some up in this part of the world, into South Australia, New South Wales, a lot in Victoria, and even in West Australia. There's been some really good results out of that small group learning and some increases in lambing percentage, but also the sheep has changed quite a bit. So we're moving away from that, from more of a merino-based flock to other breeds. This is a bit of a rundown on how many sheep we've got, how many ewes we're joined for 2016, how many lambs are conceived, how many are marked, sold and kept. Down the bottom there, and I've highlighted that, 12 million lambs are lost. And look, I reckon that could be more than that, as I was saying before about our wet winters that we've incurred this year. So we can make a lot of ground in that area and improve lamb survival, and it's certainly something that we've got to put a lot more emphasis on. This is just how the flock has sort of changed in its dynamics. And, you know, we've moved away from that merino to merino joinings. You can see that in the middle column there, in the maroon, that was around that sort of 2009 period. As a result of the GFC, we had a lot of actual merino ewes that were joined to terminal sires or maternal or other breeds. That had a big impact on the actual amount of merinos that we've got now. So yeah, the flock has changed, and one of the big things I suppose that we've got to realise is that 1 in 3 of our ewe lambs that'll be born in 2017 will be a merino. So if you rely on a merino as a part of your system, where are they going to come from? So it's quite alarming when you think of that. So obviously we've got people that are in a buy-in system. Maybe there's some considerations about self-replacing and that sort of thing. Righto. So enough of all the stats and whatever. I'll just talk about what we do down in a place called Balmoral, sort of halfway between Balmoral and Harrow in a 600 mil rainfall zone, south of Horsham, northwest of Hamilton. All my sheep look like that, like magnificent. We've always got grass like that. No, it's not right. I've got a lot of muddy paddocks at the moment, and we're right under the pump in August. So I suppose I could talk all day, but some of the things that are probably key to our business is having a little bit of flexibility and probably having a desire to improve and be proactive to challenges. Just gives a bit of a rundown. Georgie and I started a partnership in 2005. I started farming in 1997 as a sole trader, and was fortunate enough to purchase 300 acres off my parents and lease a further 500 acres. And as Ken Solly says, I've had a lot of heat on my arse for a long time, and that actually makes you pretty proactive in what you do. So we've bought a lot of land in the last 10 years, and it's good. But it has its challenging times, and I'll go into a bit of that. We've in buying a lot of it, having opportunity to buy land, and I'm not going to tell you guys anything. Often that land's pretty run down and pretty ordinary, and that's the only land that you can afford, or the bank will let you afford. So it's important, and sometimes it's great opportunities to be able to sort of clean the slate and get stuck into it. We're a little bit different to you guys. A lot of you guys up here, we like to build our stock numbers and work on that rather than our machinery inventory, so it's a little bit different. We've had challenging seasons, so just as you have, we've used stock containment areas since 2006, since the 2006 drought. We've used them every year, whether it's just on the break to build up a feed wedge or like the last 2 years when we run out of feed in the paddocks, we just get the sheep off and look after our pastures. This is how we sort of try and hit our growth curve. That's when we grow pasture, and that's when our stocking rate starts to increase. So our stocking rate will increase as we have feed available, or we think we're going to have feed available. So sometimes there's some challenges in that. Infrastructure, you've got Atlex Sheepyards here, Tommy Austin, you can go and talk to him, but having some pretty good infrastructure that's a pleasure to use. And I've only just recently been able to afford to do that, and I wish I'd invested in infrastructure a long, long time ago. So, you know, putting some plans together, starting afresh, and not putting up with sort of half working infrastructure and starting afresh is certainly the way to go. We operate in big mobs of sheep as much as we can, and then once we get to lambing, we lamb down in as smaller mobs as we've got. Water is it was a hot topic. It's amazing what a wet winter does, and you sort of turn, what I've got excess, I've got heaps of water, but it's when we bought our main property 5 years ago, it was the first, it was after 2010, 11, all our dams are overflowing, we had heaps and heaps of water, it wasn't really I suppose hot in front of mind, but you know, you learn from your mistakes. So the first thing we did was get a dozer in and rip a heap of polypipe in and make sure that water wasn't going to be an issue in the future. And we've done a lot more even this last 6 months on infrastructure. So reticulating water works really well for us. We sort of break our business into three segments. We grow, feed, we try and eat as much of that feed as we can, and then we try and keep that pastures on our farm. So I don't know which one's the most challenging. I reckon growing grass is pretty easy. Put fertiliser on it and you get about 500 different types of ryegrasses, and there's crops and there's phalaris and there's all sorts of stuff you can put in the ground, and it's reasonably simple. The hardest one to do is to utilise your feed. It's been pretty damn easy the last couple of years when it doesn't rain, but when it does rain, it certainly can be a challenge, and it's not a time to be complacent. So trying to convert that grass that you spend a lot of money on, or that good year, into as much cash as you can is super important. Remembering, 80% of our profits are in about 25% of our years. So and I don't know if that really actually differs much across any industry, whether it's a cropping industry or a grazing industry. We can't afford to graze crops in our area. I've got a few croppers around me, and in a year like this when it's wet, our most well-drained ground down in our neck of the wood will grow us the most grass. So if we're going to put a crop on it, we've got to eat it. So we've all got to eat part of it. It's a bit of a false economy. This is just some crops that we had a good day. Ken Solly and I have been involved with a few farmers around Horsham and around Wanwanda that have got significant livestock in their businesses and have been doing some really exciting things with grazing their cereal crops and actually putting in some specific crops that are get them through those tough periods like the middle of winter. And it's fantastic to see. There's some really good stuff happening out there. So our rainfall zone's sandy loams. We're not typically cropping country at all, but it forms a really good part of our winter feed demand, is to have that crop there that, with ewes and lambs, that we can graze those crops off between July and August. This year we were that wet, our second grazing on those crops wasn't going to happen because it was our crop ground was that wet. So luckily we had eaten most of it in the start of July. Summer crops are part of a pasture innovation program, and they're quite good over the summer. Ken's going to talk a bit later on this afternoon about labour efficiency, but it's no different to running any operation. You've got to do it efficiently and effectively. we feed a lot of grain. Grain's the best thing that we can feed. It's easy. It's a hell of a lot easier to put the air conditioner on, fill up a feeder like that as quick as you can, and zoom around the farm and accurately feed exactly what the sheep want. So my wife can jump in the Land Cruiser with one of the kids, and she can feed 8,000 sheep in 3.5 hours, and with blocks that are 8 or 10 k's apart. So having those having big augers, not pencil augers that take about 3 hours to fill your feeder, but having big augers and having scales on your feeder and doing feed testing your grain, all those sort of things are really, really important. A little bit about, I'm very passionate about surviving as many lambs as we conceive. And, things like mob size and managing your twins is really important. I've got about 20 years of diaries that'll tell me that, generally speaking, a mob that is smaller with multiples will have a higher marking percentage. I've leased country, I've had all sorts of varying topography and aspects and pastures and that sort of thing, but generally speaking, the smaller we have our mobs with multiple bearing ewes, the better the result we have. It's not always the case, so there's other things we've got to consider. What we're doing in the last 12 months, and I think what we're going to do for the rest of, I'm really excited about this, is we're actually joining our stock for 17 days now. So we'll tease our ewes for 2 weeks with vasectomised rams, and then we join for 17 days. We can get about 75% of our ewes joined in that 17 days. The first 17 days we have a break, and then we go again. So a lot of farms, and it doesn't matter whether you're at Birchip or you're at Balmoral, we've all got better. We've got maybe a third of the farm that's really good for lambing, a third that's a bit average, and a third's pretty ordinary. And what we're wanting to do, we have control over pretty much everything that we do with sheep, bar the weather. So if we can dial up the right amount of feed, get as good a shelter as we can, whether it's good privacy, whether we can have, we have the right condition of those ewes, the right mob size and stocking rate. If we can do all that, if we get a horrible weather and wind chill, and we've had an absolute caning with weather this year during our lambing, and we've had some really good results, and it's just trying to put the ewes in the best part of your farm 2 or 3 times. So we just lamb in the best paddocks multiple times. So there's some of the valleys that we've got. So obviously, we've got 2 extremes. We've got tops of hills where we have crops and stuff, and it's highly exposed to southwest weather fronts or any weather front for that matter. So they're the sort of types of paddocks that we like to lamb in. We divide them up temporarily with, I think there's some Gallagher guys here today. They're just poly hot wire reels. They're excellent for grazing crops effectively as well, but we can subdivide our paddocks into, instead of having a 15 hectare paddock, we'll have 3 5 hectare paddocks. We reel in our reels, we put urea out, trying to get as much feed for our first lambing, and then we use gibberellic acid between our second and third lambing. Anyway, it sounds complicated, but it's working really well, so we're really excited about that. A little bit about mob sizes, the smaller the better. Look, single bearing ewes, I don't care. I've lambed single bearing ewes in mobs of 1,500, 1,000. There's not really that much implications with that, but when you get down to twin bearing ewes, and even when you got ewes that we've got more than 2, then the smaller the better. Having a bit of flexibility in stocking rate, we bring a lot of cattle in from the Otways, sort of between June and July, and they're our lawnmowers. They'll eat our excess feed in the spring if we have a good spring. If it's not wet where we are, then they're starting to grow grass down the Otways, and they'll take their cattle back a bit earlier. This is, you can try and invent better ways quicker ways to get around your sheep, but, you've got to assess a lot of risks that you do on your farm. I'm a half full sort of a bloke, and my wife's a half empty sort of, and the balance is, comes out pretty right in the end. So I think with anything, I think I might have been broke if I wasn't married to my wife. She's a good leveller, but I think you can get a good balance in your business, and hopefully we've sort of got that. Just a bit of bragging rights. These are the sort of sheep that we run down home. These are ewe lambs we've been working on our ewe lamb joinings for quite a while now, and these ewe lambs are born in start of July 2015. We scanned them end of June this year, and they scanned 152% to the ewe lambs join. So they're lambing actually at the moment. But it's a really good return and quick return on your genetics. These are my rams. These are my sale rams. We shore them on Saturday. We flog our rams into the ground. So we feed them really well up until about May, until the break, and then we get those rams to emulate what they're going to breed for you. So we push them really hard. There's no self-feeders, there's no hay bales, or they don't go in a shed. We put them under the pump, and look, there's the odd one that doesn't handle it, but they're the ones that we don't want to sell to anyone. So yep, my shearers every year sort of go, I think you've pushed it a little bit too far this year, Tim. We can't punch the bellies off. But what it does is gives you confidence when you're selling those genetics. So find someone that is breeding and they actually do turn into something that looks like that in about 6 or 8 weeks. Ken's going to talk a little bit about ASBVs, I think, today. Look, find with all your sheep that you're buying out there, all your seed stock, make sure you've got as much information on them as you possibly can. And I apologise to O'Connor's that I didn't have a red tractor up there today. I knew I should have had a red tractor, but a green one was the first one on Google that I found. When you go and buy a tractor, the fact that it's green or it's red and it pulls stuff, is not really enough information to you to invest in it. So why go and buy a ram with a set of nuts that it looks big? And I was looking at some comments of some of the sheep that were sold down at Sheepvention, thousands of dollars. And there was comments like, it had nice white bright wool and it was 115 kilos. Come on. Why would you... I suppose I was lucky to start my farming career in the mid-90s, and there was a thing called Lamb Plan, which still exists today. And I have never, ever bought a ram in my life without breeding values. So all the things that you can't see how fertile it is, you can't see how much muscle's in there, you can't see how much worm tolerance it's got. For God's sake, if you're going to invest in seed stock and you're going to buy a ram or a bull, please get as much information as you can. And if you're not getting it from your current seed stock producer, encourage them to invest in measurement, and so get involved in Merino Selected Lamb Plan. It's just, I suppose it's, there's no way in the world I would ever consider buying, the Adelaide Show Champion unless it had a heap of data on it. Not a chance. So, here we are trying to run commercial ewes out in the paddock, and we've got a ram that's fluffed up with a ribbon around it. We're serious about agriculture and we want to try to progress our industry. Then we need data, we need measurement, and we need some reality with the genetics that we're buying. Something that's living in a shed for the whole of its life and fed up on a self-feeder. What sort of animal, how are you going to decipher whether that's going to do your bit, if it's pissing down rain and that ewe that ram has bred has got to tough it out. So I'll leave that. Just another thing, and it's a little bit of a thing, I think people's flock structure, for us, we're building our business, we're trying to increase our lamb numbers yearly. I think flock structure is sort of forgotten about a little bit, and it's hard sometimes when you're in a system where you might be buying in your ewes, and God knows what ewes are going to be worth at the end of the year, but they'll be expensive. When you're self-replacing and running a self-replacing flock, don't be too greedy and start, putting a terminal sire over too many of them. Having a good young flock gives you a lot of flexibility in your business. So if a lease ground comes up, and Ken's going to talk about some options with leasing and that sort of thing later on, but it gives you a lot of power and a lot of flexibility and a lot of culling pressure on your flock. Having a skeleton crew of stock is, it's risky. I reckon it's really risky. You get a bad season and you just watch those old sheep just not do it for you, basically. This is a bit of a production goal, and that's something that we set to do 5 years ago. We haven't finished marking all our lambs this year, but we will be around that 82 to 84. We've set targets, and we've got an aim to get there, and I think it's really important to have those targets. Know how much energy your business needs. So if you're running a livestock business, don't be kidded that you have to go and buy another load of barley. Most of you will have the barley in the silo, so it makes it easier, but it's still opportunity costs. So you can actually sit down and work out how much feed in an average year, what it's going to be worth, how much grain do you need in a poor year, how much you need in an average year. Don't get surprised. So always set targets, and at the end of the day, hopefully we have more of this. And I haven't had a lot of this, I must admit, in the last 5 years, but it's getting better and better. One thing that I wanted to talk about, I didn't emphasise too much with the livestock crop interaction, is you don't think that you can just go and buy a mob of sheep and stick it on a crop and make money out of it. I certainly can't whack a crop down in my neck of the woods and make money out of it. I've tried that, and my agronomist has taught me how to control things like annual ryegrass and spray top 2 years out and all those sort of things. So I'm trying to do my little bit of cropping that I do down my neck of the woods as best I can, and it's no different for you guys up here. You wouldn't even think twice about not doing weed control and your management of your crops. So let's work on our livestock systems, make sure you're getting information and using ASBVs, make sure you have your ewes in optimum condition so you can get, optimum amount of lambs conceived. Think about your lambing and try and get try and reach those production targets, and always have a target to improve. Thank you very much.
There's a couple of roving mics around the room, so we've got time for a couple of questions. Anyone have any questions for Tim?
Tim, I was just wondering how you manage your pastures later on in the season when you're trying to get, say, some clover seed set, and you're running, your farm to capacity. Do you try and manage that, or do you just sort of say, no, we'll make more money by eating everything and we'll reseed next year?
That's a good question. I mean, we use most of our, predominantly we've got subclovers, so they're hard seeded. We do use some balancer, and we actually find that balancer's actually might be very good this year, and giving that extra couple of tonne boost in around a weaning time in that sort of September, October period. You certainly can do some damage by eating those annual types out to the boards and having to re-sow, but subclovers, they're really, really hardy. It's very hard to get rid of subclover in our country. It's luckily it's a good weed. So the question was, what are the genetics of our sheep? They're a mixture. We're based on Coopworth genetics, which originated out of New Zealand. Coopworth's a half Border Leicester, half Romney. It's a performance recorded sheep, and it always has been. But we're open to anything, so we'll as long as it's a sheep. We'll use white Suffolk as probably our terminal mix. So Border, Leicester, Cootworth is probably our sort of maternal base, and then we'll blend in our terminal genetics. So basically, we're just tiptoeing between the two. So we still like the boys to shear some wool off at shearing time. We cut about 3.5 to 4.2 kilos. It's about 30 micron. My wool rep's down the front row there. So, when I drag one out at Smoko and there's no belly on it, I know I've got to put a bit of wool back on it. But yeah, and we find that we get really good skin prices. So we can put all our ewes are joined to a maternal composite ram. So it's just like a self-replacing merino flock, but it's a self-replacing prime lamb flock. So we don't actually have terminal size per se, other than using them as stud rams. So every ram in the paddock and every ewe that we breed can be a breeder. But we're still we haven't got long shaggy wool that'd be off like a pure, like a Border, Leicester or Cootworth. We've got a bit of a mishmash of both, so we can sort of optimise our skin value as well as our growth rate and carcass attributes.
Tim. Right.
Tim, just in relation to your reference panel that you chair, what are the mechanisms for feeding back information back into that panel to get research and development in our region?
Yeah, so the committee that we've got is basically a formal committee, and we're building a network. So we had a meeting just recently, about 6 weeks ago in Horsham, which Birchip Cropping Group, Mallee Sustainable Farming, Vic No Till, all I suppose industry bodies are invited to. We'll even have producers within that region that are keen to come along to those meetings. So it's very much not a secret squirrel type of process, more the welcome, very transparent and open. So hopefully that'll feed back. We'll get as much information back to those, email networks or whatever we do. Yeah.
And last question.
Yeah, hi
Chris.
Tim. I suppose wearing the BCG hat, but also the farmers in the 300 and 400 mil rainfall zone, what's the number one innovation or piece of research you think they should be trying to stick into their farm to make sure they can run the most profitable farm they can? Around livestock.
Around livestock.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Livestock. Yeah. Look, I think managing lamb survival is probably and a lot of that is actually really cheap to do. So it's just being proactive in your planning. The great thing about up here, and it's like the guys that we've had a bit to do with down in the Wimmera area, is they've got so much capability in putting in a crop like that and having specific sort of growing the feed's not the problem. It's sort of all the little things around it. So it's a 1%er. The whole ewe production and lamb survival. It's a number. It's not one quick fix or one silver bullet. It's a combination of things. So whether it's mob size, shelter, feed, condition score, they're all got to be ticked off to line yourself up for the best result. So that'd be I reckon there's a lot of I'm sick of hearing, and it's like the last 10 years, the big pub brag that we have in the livestock industry and the sheep industry is scanning rates. You go to the pub, scan 180. Whoop-de-doo, mate. Who cares? The pub brag should be, I got 85. And someone will go, what's 85? 85% survival. That's what you should be bragging about, that trying to, get better at that survival of what we've already got. Don't let it slip through your fingers. So that's probably the main thing that I reckon we can all work on, and at very little cost. It's just being, pretty smart and proactive at it.
Thank you. So if we'd all like to thank Tim, please. Thank you for that, Tim. And I'd just like to reiterate that, if you do have research and development ideas for this medium to low rainfall zone and you want to have input into where your MLA levies are going, make sure you harass Tim wildly.